So firstly, thank you all for coming today to what I hope is going to be the first social housing open data forum. We've got representation today from a great many social housing providers, sector experts, Department of Levelling Up Homes and Communities, public sector social housing, the NHF, HACT, and we've also got the Open Data Institute with us today. So with regards to the session, as I say, it's going to be recorded. Can I ask you to mute your microphones unless you're speaking? And could I encourage you to keep your cameras on? Importantly, please can I ask you to add any questions, ideas, concerns into the chat or raise your virtual hand during the Q&A sessions. We'll endeavour to respond to everything, if not during the session today, by early next week. So, to set the context, those of us working in the social housing sector have an enviable purpose, providing homes and communities that improve the lives of people, not just now, but for generations to come. We have the opportunity to make a positive difference by operating efficiently, investing prudently, and importantly, putting the customers at the heart of everything we do. Our discussion today aligns not just directly with this purpose, but the published strategies of the government, the regulator, the ombudsman, and the NHF, and they have the potential to solve so many of the challenges that we currently have in the sector today. We're going to be exploring the potential for the improved use of open data, something that's already happening in so many other sectors. This is based on common open data mission, which is focused on customer needs. It's results driven, ethical, innovative, and collaborative. It provides the opportunity for the social housing sector to come together as a single team. More specifically, we're going to be exploring the potential of a national social housing database. That's a mandatory single focused database of all social homes in the UK based on standardised open data structures. This aligns with one of the primary recommendations of the Better Social Housing Review, which was that social housing organisations should come together to publish a thorough audit of all social housing in the UK. Ireland is already a step ahead of us, with the Irish government commissioning a fully digital asset management system for all of the 31 local authorities across the Republic of Ireland. We don't underestimate the task. It will take time and commitment, but with the right vision and determination, this is an initiative that will help us to deliver so much more to our residents. So to kick matters off, we're going to explore this topic with two of my fellow members of the steering group, Kate Davies and Steve Dungworth. Kate has worked in the social housing sector for over 30 years, for almost 20 of them as Chief Executive of Notting Hill Genesis. Kate has just published a white paper which highlights the need for radical reform in social housing through better collaboration, interdependent working, and technological innovation. If you've not read it, can I recommend it to you? It's excellent and I think extremely insightful. Steve also has a great many years experience in the social housing sector, as well as being one of the nicest guys in the sector. He's been an award-winning transformation director and is now supporting the sector as a consultant. He's a visionary, and the suggestion of a national social housing database was originally his. So without further ado, can I remind you to put any questions or ideas in the chat? Kate and Steve, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Colin, for that sort of rousing welcome. And thank you very much to everybody who's come today. I really appreciate giving up your Friday lunchtime to join us for what we think is a really important question. So today we're going to focus on the national database of social housing properties, or homes as I prefer to call them. And Steve and I are going to talk together about how this has come about. And we're happy to be interrupted if that's what you'd like. So just moving on to the first slide, what I thought we should start with is how this problem presents itself to somebody running or working in a housing association. What are the problems that we face? And we just checked out with Michael from CHP, what is his chief executive thinking about? And he put this number one: data-driven decision-making is challenging. Whether that's for the board as a whole or the executive team, or whether that's for every single transaction when someone in a call centre is taking a query from a resident, I've got drafty windows. what data have they got to tell them when were the windows replaced? What kind of windows are they? Are they hardwood, softwood, or plastic? Is this a problem in the block as a whole, or is this just in this particular place? Did the resident allow someone in to service the windows when required, and so on? All that information will be useful for someone making a decision in the here and now, but it's just not available. So often, and this is where problem number 2 arises, is the amount of random and irrational decisions that we make. And I think this is particularly important with property spend. I know when I was at Notting Hill, we were spending over £100 million a year on repairs. I don't mind spending that kind of money if I know that it's not random and irrational. If it's actually adding to the value of those properties and adding to the quality of life for the residents, it's definitely worth doing. But if you're doing it by repeat jobs or going back and having to pay people to turn up and check stuff, it's wasted money, and it's money that should be going into property improvement, not in just sort of keeping the broken system working. So those are 2 problems that really faced me. But the one that really, I still got it like on my conscience today, a year later, the feeling that we were letting down quite a lot of our tenants, of our customers, because they expressed their dissatisfaction right up to the chief executive in passionate letters, in asking you to come around, and they just feel neglected and not listened to. And that's one reason for that, is because our communication depends on what our IT systems collect for us. We had housing officers using WhatsApp, telephones, letters, all sorts of things. Is the whole process recorded? And is it in a simple, accessible form? And is it boiled down through AI to something you can use in the moment? If we were able to address the communication problem through having very much better data available in the here and now, we could become much more transparent. And I really think this would have the effect of building trust with our customer group. So that's the problem as it presents itself to me in a housing association. Not sure it's going to ring true for everybody, but it'd be interesting to see if it is. And when I was putting my pamphlet together, Steve was one of my respondents, and I told him the problem and he came up with a solution. So Steve, what did you tell me?
So thanks, Kate. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the co-founder and director of Golden Marzipan. We focus on the change and governance impact of technology. I was previously a director of digital here in a large housing association here in Yorkshire, and I've got a personal business and social interest in data. So this idea has been brewing around my head for quite a while now. I came at it from a business point of view rather than from a data or systems. But I think this incorporates some of the following features. So I think the data is in a single place. Now, whether that is a data warehouse or a lake or a store in the cloud, but it's a single place, a website where you can find this information. The architecture would force us to define and standardize our data so it can be shared. It's at least in part based on the HACT data standards, but it's an opportunity for us to come together and make those definitions simple and clear. It's seamless. It's more than just NROSH. The data is current. It's days old, not months old. So we would need to use modern connectors like APIs. It's used by the regulator and the housing ombudsman. It's used for checking of basic information like safety and property type and property characteristics and EPC rating. Probably the most important part for me is based on the fundamental principle and game-changing principle of open data. There's lots of data already available in the public space about our properties, whether that's on land registry, postcode database, EPC on the DLUC website, ONS, all that data is there, currently not used and collaborated with. So it does include data from housing associations, but I think to start with, not a lot. What would be the most useful for the main stakeholders? So it doesn't replace, for example, existing systems. It's just extraction of a small amount of data that we can share again and collaborate with. And finally, and again, I agree with you, Kate, the most important bit is about involvement of tenants. And wouldn't this be a great way to get some controlled feedback about the property and the standard beyond just satisfaction? So that was my thinking. I'm happy to discuss and debate and expand, but those are the basic principles. Kate, who do you think, who else benefits?
Yeah, you've mentioned obviously social landlords themselves and their tenants, and I've touched on that as well. But when you're putting forward an idea, if you can have it benefit to more people, you know, a win-win-win-win, then it's more compelling than if it's just, you know, what's in it for me. So I think the reason why this really appealed to me, Steve, was that the landlord will benefit because you start to clean up your data, you start to using common data and get into the practice of it. It doesn't have to be for millions of data points, as you say, but it could just be a discipline that we put on ourselves to begin to record things in the same way. You can't imagine the chaos that would be, you know, if everybody had the equivalent of their own barcode on a bottle of shampoo. You know, this is about sticking to some standards that we use, like in our accounts, for example. And it would enable us to judge ourselves against others, which is quite important, and the regulator looks for us to do that. But also if we were sharing stuff, sharing experience, or we were taking stock from some other company, other housing association, it's all there ready and it makes it a lot easier. As I say, for the tenant, they've got access to things. They don't have to phone us for everything. They can have a look at their fire safety certificate and see what the outstanding actions are, for example. But the two other groups I think are really, really important here is the regulator. I remember many times at Notting Hill having to put spreadsheets together and send them over to them on a monthly basis to check that we're doing our fire safety or other kind of safety stuff properly. But if it's all available on an open database, then the regulator can just look it up. And finally, I want to talk about vendors to the sector, because housing associations often feel that they're not well served by the private sector, but it's partly because we don't really know how to use them. TfL, when it put its information out as open data on when buses were arriving and leaving the depot and whether the train was busy or not, then the private sector started picking up this data and using it to create fantastic apps. Like, I don't know if you use bus apps or Google apps or, you know, train apps. These can tell you and make your journey a whole lot better as a consumer. And the private sector have got the time and the resources and the interest in making products that sell. So I think giving them much more information about us will really help them produce better products for us. Steve, one thing that has been said, though, is that, you know, is this realistic? Can this be done? The housing association sector doesn't really like collaborating very much. And I know you've talked to Maria about how this worked in her sector.
Yeah, I think that's the second thing that people said to me when I talk about this idea. The first was, what a great idea. The second is it will never be done. But this is not new. Open, shared and syndicated data has been happening in other sectors for years, especially in the financial services. And I sought advice and support from Maria. I was put in touch with her. She's involved in the conveyancing and mortgage application subsector of financial services. And she gave me some great advice on collaboration, on building minimum viable products, and on funding. And the proof of the pudding is that for Maria and her group, they got a mortgage application down to 20 seconds via Atom Bank from a typical previous timescale of 2 to 6 weeks. So loads of experience and support which is available there out in other sectors. So Kate, you and I first met around 6 weeks ago. Things have happened quite quickly. What's been happening so far?
So you and I, we put out something onto LinkedIn, and people sort of came to us. So we created a steering committee to have a few more people working on this. We developed the idea a bit, but we felt that we should go to a wider trusted group, and that's all the people on the meeting today. You all know what you're doing. We thought you can critique it and tell us whether it's got legs or not. We really would like challenge and feedback from you. I notice there's something going into the chat now. It'd be really great if you could do that. And there's obviously a chance to speak and tell us what you think. We know we need to get money. At the moment, everybody's working as a volunteer, giving their time for nothing, but we want to get enough money to deliver this. And we're applying for government grants, we're considering crowdfunding and potentially supplier engagement. We're like a startup, and if you like, you're our family and friends, and we're going to sort of see whether you've got something you can invest, your time, your ideas, or potentially the money of your organisations. We're not suggesting you put money, your hand in your own pocket, but to get this sort of investment to get it going. And I think that's sort of, you know, where we've got to up now. There's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of drive, but we need to go a bit larger.
So let me introduce the steering committee. You all know Mr. Digital Social Housing, Colin, who is proof of it's what you know and who you know. You've been introduced to myself and Kate. I would like to endorse Colin's suggestion that you read Kate's paper, get a deeper understanding of some of the things that we've talked about today. We have Jackie Bateson, MD of HACT. I don't know whether she's here today. She doesn't normally work Fridays, so she may be deputised by Matt Grenier. So HACT are the owner of the data standards and at the heart of this initiative. I did see Neil on the call, so Director of Data Futurists and a board member. I know Arturo can't be with us today, data expert, busy on many of his projects. And finally, Julia, Director of Transformation at Raven, and I know Julia will be speaking to you in a few minutes with another great case study. Kate, how can everybody on the call help today?
Okay, so this is the last slide from us. Obviously, we have to convince you yet, but these are some things you could do to help. As I say, using that startup analogy, we want people to talk about this, add it to your agenda as an executive team, just talk to people you know in housing and technology about what they think. Write about it on your blog or on LinkedIn. Explain and describe what it might mean for your organisation. You know, organisations are different, and what would be the benefit for you of this? Start to make the case, you know, the use cases or the case studies that could be beneficial. We'd like you to actually to join our group so we can use your name. I know people are always a bit worried about that, but when we're going for funding, to say it's got support from 100 organisations or 100 individuals would really make a difference. We've got a WhatsApp group, which you can get onto via Colin, and you can follow us on LinkedIn, and we've actually got a LinkedIn group too. So there's a way of you coming in and sort of signing up to support the general concept. This is like what, you know, it doesn't matter what your religion is, you can join this. It's like yoga, yeah? You don't have to believe anything particular beyond this idea. We're having some working parties. Julia and I are going to run one on communication. Colin is seeking funding and is looking to work with people who can put some money in. So if you've got a commercial mindset or you're well connected, you can sign up to that. The HACT team are going to get people to work with them to see how far we can use the HACT standards. Neil and Arturo are looking at creating the minimal viable product and what that would look like. Steve has a working group as well. I've just forgotten which one, but we're all going to be working with other people. So if you've got some time and you think this has got legs and you'd like to get experience or offer your experience, we'd really love to hear from you. Tell us what you and your organisation do practically that we haven't even thought about. You can have your own subgroup. This is not top-down control, and we want to work with you and others to decide what the product will look like. I mean, it's only been a few months, so we really want to get much more granular in our understanding. So that's all there is from us. We're happy to come in on the discussions, but most importantly, we really would like to hear from you. This has been organised to get your views and feedback. So please, respond to Colin when he asks for questions or comments. We'd really like to hear your opinions. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, both of you. I think it sets the scene very nicely. What I'll do is there's been some fantastic questions that have been raised and some thoughts and comments. So I'm gonna be rather cheeky, and for some of you, I'm going to ask you if you'd mind just making your points, because I think it would be good for others to hear them. Just on the point of funding, very quickly, there is a lot of money out there looking for a home for good causes, things that are going to create positive social change. So we don't think it's going to be difficult to get funding assistance for this. In fact, funding experts that we've spoken to have said, yeah, no problem. We've got to obviously put the business case forward for it, but there are people looking for home for such money. So I don't perceive that to be a big challenge at all. Could I ask Mark Thompson? Mark made an extremely good point. I've heard Mark speak before, and he's brilliant. So now I'm putting you on the spot here, Mark. But would you mind making the point you made in the chat?
Just about brilliant, Colin. Thank you very much. Yeah, delighted to. I'm a professor in a business school, and I've been working around sort of the idea of platforms in government for years and years. So take social housing. If you were an alien and you looked at the way that we organise ourselves, we address social housing in this country, you'd think we'd gone absolutely crazy, because basically we are cutting and shutting all of the frontline services that citizens actually care about. Same with local government. So whatever it is, we're cutting them, and we all know about the cuts. And yet, you would also look and say, wow, we're also presiding over sort of legacy 20th century sort of ways of delivering them. So in social housing, we've got 1,800 social housing providers, each running their own corporate layer. So, chief exec, board, marketing department, IT, HR, comms, complaints, and the rest. And the truth is that in the last century, obviously we had no choice but to set organisations up that way. In this century, no modern organisation would dream of it. So my analogy was, imagine if Tesco's ran each one of its 4,000 stores the way that we run social housing in this country. So imagine if every single Tesco's store had its own chief exec, marketing department, boardroom, sort of over the top of the Tesco's store. You imagine what we'd think of that, and imagine how subpar each of the Tesco's stores would be, for all the reasons I don't need to explain. And so really, a part of the reason I'm on this call is because I think that common data infrastructure is absolutely step one in doing this. And as I said, I think as soon when it's done, it'll be one of those things we'll scratch our heads and think, how on earth do we carry on without having one at all? But I see it as a step towards something much, much bigger. I think it's possibly in time possible to transfer 20 to 30% of the operating budget, 20 billion operating budget in social housing, to the front line, instead of spending them on duplicating the wheel. And just to finish, I'm aware, as I mentioned in the blog, that many social housing organisations are currently beginning to contract for what we call digital layers, might be Salesforce, might be something like that, so that we can all do the kind of, the edge computing and the sensors and social media analysis and all the rest of it. But if you think about what each of us independently are going to start to spend on suppliers and consultants and individual contracts, when there's absolutely no business case or justification for us each to have a bespoke suit in that area, we could quite happily pool resources, commission the thing once, and actually have a service which was hundreds of times better funded than each of us would be able to do, let alone supporting the long tail of social housing providers who can't afford any of that stuff anyway. So I think the situation is going to get worse and worse. I think we're just poised to spend even more money reinventing the wheel and making things even worse, which of course finally defunds money spent on actually what we're all about, which is good social housing provision.
Fantastically and passionately put, Mark. I remember back in 2010, so 14 years ago now, I was asked to speak at the National Housing Federation conference, IT conference. And at that point in time, the topic was what is the cloud? Can you explain to everyone what the cloud is? And at the end of the session, I put a challenge to the sector to say, what if there was a community cloud, a social housing cloud, particularly for maybe smaller organisations where they could share with a similar IT system. They have their own private data areas, but they actually have someone else, if you like, providing their IT. And wow, I think that would have saved millions and helped a lot of organisations. But no, thank you. That was brilliantly put. Um, Julia, I would like to hand over to you for a second, if I may, to introduce Martin from NWS, and he's actively involved in the water stream program. So, Julia, would you mind introducing him? You're on mute. Ah, sadly, Julia, that's not coming together. So, Martin, shall I introduce you very quickly? I don't have it in front of me now, so my apologies. But let me talk more about Stream. Stream is an example of a fantastic open data initiative that's going on in the water sector at the moment, and Martin's here to tell us a little bit about it. Martin, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, of course. And good afternoon, everyone. So I'll do just for context a brief introduction. So my name's Martin Jackson. My role is head of digital strategy and product management within Northumbrian Water Group. Northumbrian Water Group is a water and wastewater business in three regions: Northumbria, Essex, and Suffolk. Roughly, just to give you a scale, about 3,200 employees and serving about 4.7 million customers. So just gives you an idea of the size of the organization. And I guess a little bit of serendipity, I think, brought me here this afternoon. So I'm going to share a little bit of a story. I guess I'll start with just very briefly our context on open data as an organization and some of the drivers. But in particularly, I've got just a few slides. I'm not going to bombard you with PowerPoint presentations today, just to steer the conversation really and share a little bit about an industry open data initiative in water, which I believe has some very transferable elements for what you're here to discuss today. So hopefully, we'll offer some insight into a group, an industry that have carried forward from where I guess you are today to something actually, as you can see, is actually tangible now, and we've got some data actually being shared. So I'm going to pop the slides up in a moment. I guess first, just a little bit of context, really. I'm going to talk a little bit about the industry context in a moment, albeit anybody that watches the news or picks up a newspaper at the moment can probably get a sense of the industry context at the moment. But I guess reversing back from that and talking about, I guess, us as an organisation, and the reason why that's relevant really is because we are, I guess, the lead partner in this initiative, and a part of, I guess, getting started with this would take one organisation or a small cluster of organisations to actually bring this to the table within the industry. And why we felt that we needed to do that as an organisation was that if we go back about 4, 5, 6 years ago, we were starting to use data and insight as a really successful tool for how we could move the needle on performance on a range of different aspects of what we do as an organization. So an example might be leakage performance, and data and insight was providing some really good outputs for us as an organization, which was enabling us to really focus on what the best interventions will be for our organization. We got some success for that, but naturally you start to gravitate to, well, others around the industry are clearly grappling with the same challenge here. And we've got some limitations on our data, on the scale of our data, on how complete it is. And I guess from that part, we started to think, well, actually, there's something bigger here than our organization. So we started a process which eventually led to where we are today. So I'm just going to start sharing a few slides, and I think there is a bit of time at the end for any questions, so I can come in and answer anything specific then. So I'm presenting this in the context of Stream, so not in the context of Northumbrian Water. As I say, it's we were the organisation that was the lead water industry organisation on this, and he'll come on to say why that was relevant, particularly when we went and sought funding from the regulator. But I'll position it as a more holistic piece that we've been doing. So I guess going back to the point I made earlier, what was the motivation for Stream, I guess, existing? So, like I said, all organizations in the industry were really grappling with very similar challenges. Obviously, we're in an industry that's operating in quite a time of change. Obviously, climate change, customer expectations, the political landscape. Like yourselves in your industry, I'm sure those elements provide pressures on your industry as well. But in a water business, particularly those environmental changes, means that it's no longer the case where we can continue to operate as we always have done. And we put together a digital strategy 5-6 years ago to be the most digital water company in the world, was the tagline to that. And the idea behind that really was, how can we leverage data and insight more effectively and drive what we do as a business in a more intelligent way through those tools and capabilities. So the first step, I guess, within that journey was to table this within the industry. Now, how did we do that? I guess we needed to find a forum that we could initially attract some traction in, and the forum that we chose to table that in, because this is very much being driven out of our technology function in Northumbrian Water, was a group of the equivalent CIOs, so Chief Information Officers, for each of the water companies, who come together quarterly. We have a dinner and we talk about various different aspects of what we do, business challenges, etc. So we start the process of just engaging in that process and starting to bring some of our counterparts in different organisations to the table. And very, very quickly, we found that others were grappling with very similar challenges to ourselves. They were seeing that data and insight within their organizations was increasingly playing a part in what they were doing and how they were informing their operational processes, how they were serving customers, how they were planning strategically over the course of the short, medium and longer term. So we got together and we got some traction within that community as a first step, which was about a realization that actually, if we're able to start sharing data across the industry and creating mechanisms to do that, that would be incredibly powerful to us. And this just gives a bit of an illustration. So this isn't how it started. Obviously, it's grown significantly, and I've got a little roadmap that I'm going to show you in a moment. But you can see that there's quite a broad spectrum now of collaborators that are involved in this. We've got 14 out of the 16 major water companies are now involved in this. Obviously, I'm aware of the scale challenge that you have in your sector and the number of different organisations and entities. But getting even 16 water companies together and aligned in terms of the strategy, etc. It's a challenging process, and it's probably beyond the scope of today. But we can certainly talk about some aspects of that individually offline if that's interesting. It is worth noting that it says 14 out of 16. The ambition is to get to 16, and the regulator, in our case, Ofwat, is incredibly keen on that happening. So they feel like in order for this to be complete, we need to have all organisations participating. And I guess we're just working through a process with the two organisations who are not currently part of Stream, just to see what would it take, what environment, what are the needs and specific requirements for them to be in a position to be able to join as well. I guess outside of the industry, partner engagement is key. I caught the tail end of that initial chat there around, the actual tooling, the platforms, the capabilities that are required, obviously, to start to bring together some of the key enablers within that has been incredibly important. And then the final kind of element of that is the wider group of stakeholders, most of them regulatory bodies of different types within the industry, to get their perspective, to get their thought process around it and what would be their needs as participants, or I guess consumers of this platform as well. So you can see now from where we started as one organisation with an idea, ambition, personally motivated by some of the needs of our own organisation, Stream has now grown into something quite significant in terms of those people that are now part of that movement. And I guess just to give you a viewpoint on the steps on the way, so around that kind of first quarter time of 2020, this was, when we were starting to float that idea with some of our counterparts, some of the others in the industry. A group was formally put together early 2020, which I guess then started to operate under the banner of Stream. So this kind of more abstract entity that included all of the various different participants. Each organisation had at least one lead participant that came into that group. We did, as the organisation that were kind of heading up the movement at that point in time, we did a lot of the more heavy lifting. So we did put a little bit more into that in terms of resources. So obviously, as you're coming together and you're starting to do blueprinting and you're starting to look at delivery plans and roadmaps and how can we approach this and what do we need, obviously you need to inject some people that are looking at that and actually involved in moving that forward. And a lot of that activity was with us at that point in time. Create a delivery plan. I think that milestone is a particularly I guess interesting one, and I guess a crucial one in our journey. So how the water industry works is we all effectively pay a levy into an innovation fund, which is managed by Ofwat, our regulator, and you can bid to draw down on that fund. So what we felt was going to be key as a catalyst here to get some working capital so it could start to engage with partners in a more meaningful way and actually get some execution. Through that blueprint phase, we were successful in obtaining some money through that route, which helped fund the resources that we need, the initial partnership relationships. And as you can see from there, through kind of through 2022 into 2023, we did the blueprinting, going to the real data, start to solution what their platform element, etc., need to look like. And then eventually we went back again to that fund to say, look, we've now got a plan, we've got a blueprint, we've got the means of a roadmap of how we would approach this. And we were awarded further funding through that route to then start to build it out into what it is today, which is effectively a formal project with key deliverables, milestones, a business case, all of those things that have been identified. And then just to finalise and touch upon the final, I guess, key milestone that's been realised to date, we published our first data at the end of last year. So all of the participants published water quality data. Now, that was, I guess, tactical. We were very, very keen to get some information published. We'd said, set a commitment and an ambition that we'd do that last year in 2023. And water quality data is the data set that within our industry is the most standardized, it's fair to say. So it felt like it was the data that we could probably publish relatively quickly in a more common format and actually show some value back and demonstrate a key deliverable from the process. In terms of what that looks like, two more slides just to give a bit of flavour in terms of what it is. So this is a kind of snapshot of the portal that sits above it. You can see there a screenshot in the middle where you can effectively search on data, and you can see the data sets that have been published. So the domestic water quality piece there that you can see is the data set that was published by each entity at the tail end of last year. And moving out conceptually, without getting into the technical detail, of which I'm certainly not the right person to take you through that, but just to give you an idea of what the platform will look like. So we're in a position now where we got the data out, we've got the portal, we've got means to produce data and host it on the Stream website. But we're working through what we call an MVP phase with partners now to deliver, I guess, a more integrated solution, more robust, sustainable solution, which is effectively this box in the middle. Now, how we've chosen to frame this is you can host data directly on the platform itself, or you can effectively host metadata to say, we've got this data, here's the metadata for it, but actually through some kind of integration or API or whatever, the water company or the entity themselves maintains full control of that, and it still remains within their environment. I guess what goes alongside the actual technology, and probably equally important, is that piece there on the right hand side, which is about how do we govern it, what standards do we meet, what actually is important here, what data has value, how's it got value. And that's a bit which is heavily in collaboration with regulators and other bodies around, what kind of data would we want to publish. Some of that is about the industry itself saying, look, we would find it really valuable if we had access to this. And some of it is about how can we feed, I guess, a broad ecosystem of collaborators and innovators through data. And some of that is obviously about transparency and regulatory requirements, customer needs, all of those various things. So there's different drivers, I think, for how we might facilitate a data set being published. And we've got a roadmap now that's being developed to say these are the key data sets, and this is the ambition for how we would make those available over the coming years. So that's a very whistle-stop tour of what we've done. I only had 5 or 10 minutes, so hopefully that's been clear. And I guess I open it up to any particular questions.
That's perfect. Thank you very much indeed, Martin. Can I just fire a question at you first? Tara from the ODIs with us here, and I've got to admit I've only really came across the ODI a number of weeks ago, but I understand they've been instrumental in helping yourselves with what you've been doing. Could you give us a bit of background to that?
Yeah, I think I would say instrumental. So I did check this as well with the team that are working in there day to day. I guess there's 2 layers to it. I think they've actually invested in actually putting resource into this process. So working alongside the team on the final detail, a finer detail, as almost a bit of a consultant role, a critical friend, us bouncing ideas, thoughts, and bringing that expertise into the group as we've evolved over those few years that we've been active. But I guess also you need a starting point as well. So they've got various different frameworks, they've got various different models, even the definition of what open data is. If you asked each of those 14 organizations, I'm sure they'd all have slight nuances on that. So actually the ability to standardize, put some frameworks around what we do and govern as a starting point, I think it's fair to say, because often industries have different nuances and we might have slightly different things we're seeking to achieve from Stream. But I think that's the role that the ODI have provided into that movement and that group. And I think throughout that they've added immense value. So I think from our standpoint, it's been a crucial partnership.
I think that sums it up. That what we're not trying to do here is recreate the wheel. This kind of thing has happened a great many times before, and it's good to know there's people like the ODI around to help with this process. So thank you, Martin. Really appreciate that. It's very, very valuable. Can I talk to a couple of my colleagues within the steering group here? There's been lots of questions being answered. I mentioned earlier, I'm not great at multitasking, so listening to what people are saying and reading the questions is not a great strength of mine. But some of my colleagues have been picking them up. Kate, Steve, are there any particular questions that you've seen that you'd like to maybe draw attention to here?
Yeah. I think they're coming out in the format of the working groups that we're starting to think about. So there's some really great questions around risk and linking back up to regulator and assurance and how that works in practice. And then I think there's some opportunities around the infrastructure, the architecture, and how we leverage the opportunities and savings there together. And I know that Neil has got his eye on those. And Kate, anything for you? You've been responding frantically. Fantastic. You're on mute, by the way.
I just decided it was a good division of labour if I tried to answer some questions in the here and now, but we can come back later. I mean, the basic thing from the chat is fantastic. Really, really positive feedback and also creative thinking, taking it on further. So it's a joy to see the engagement now. It'd been really nice to hear from Tara herself, because she's got a lot to say. I'd like to hear from Rajiv. I mean, James Green, anybody who's here today, please tell us what you think, and we'd really welcome that.
Tara, would you mind saying a few words coming from
Sure.
no, that'd be kind of you. Yeah, Open Data Institute.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an area where it's probably your specialist area, dare I say.
Yes, as the name says, we're the Open Data Institute. So our focus is on open data, but also shared data and using data and sharing data responsibly and ethically, so that as many people as possible can get the benefit out of that. I've been reading through the chat. It's actually quite difficult to keep up because there's so much going on in there. So I've just been mainly trying to read through all of that. I think some of the points around the standards really important, and ensuring that sort of all the housing associations and the regulator are bought into the same standards. I'm not familiar with the existing standards that are in place, but that definitely is a crucial aspect to this. As Martin's talked about with the Stream initiative, in terms of how these things can work, setting up something like a data institution where you've got collaboration across the different housing associations working together to maximize the value without you each having to do things individually. I know that's a lot of the points that have come up in the chat around not repeating efforts and wasting time and money that way is important. Around the risk management, I know there's been talk about you don't want to start with personal data, and that absolutely makes sense. And the point that I've made in the chat was around, you want to do the risk assessment process for all the data that's being opened up, regardless of whether it's personal data or not. As someone else I think responded to me, there can still be sensitivities that need to be considered, even if the data is not personal data. And one of the things to ensure that buy-in is to make sure that these risks have been thoroughly considered and that everyone is feeling comfortable with this process, because there will be processes and policies and work on data quality and systems that need to be considered, but it's also about the people involved to make this happen. You will need a number of people involved across working groups, but also within your different housing associations and beyond to make this happen. And the people in the culture are a really critical aspect to this, and getting buy-in from them. And it's been alluded to, sort of improving the open data or shared data literacy around that is really crucial to make sure that everyone is comfortable with what is happening and supports the process and doesn't create additional barriers here.
A question for you. No, that's great. A question for you, maybe Martin as well. I know it's one that's been raised a number of times, and that is that will we get the support of the regulator of social housing? Now, if you look at what we're looking to do and align it with the mission of the regulator, it would appear to be ideally suited. However, our regulator has a tendency to kind of not want to support initiatives like this. How have you found it in other sectors where there is a regulator, water being a good example?
Yeah, I can probably come in.
So I think,
the movement, as I described, was within the organisations themselves and driven by their individual needs. But what did align, and I think has been incredibly powerful, is the fact that the regulator, alongside that, published their ambitions for open data. So there's actually a report that they created in the early part of last year, and it's available online if you want to take a look. And as an example of that, around what they described as the role and value of open data. And I guess they've set their expectations and made them very, very clear that they want to see a whole industry movement. When we did have a few of the organisations that, for their own reasons, had chosen to maybe go a slightly different way to stream or a slightly different approach, I think it has enabled us to have further traction on those conversations, to really get into a meaningful conversation about what would it take to bring those individuals to the table as well. So I think they have been incredibly complementary, and they have been very, very clear in our industry as to what their expectations around open data will be and the value that they see for customers from it.
That's great. Thank you, Martin. Right, we have a question from Rajiv. Rajiv, would you unmute yourself?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, hear you fine.
Fantastic. It's not so much of a question, but in terms of feedback. So thanks a lot. I know there's been a lot of effort put into this over many months, and it's good to see that at least a few people are trying to solve the fundamental problems that we have. If you step back a little bit in terms of where housing associations are, where boards are, and where the regulator is at the moment there's an acute focus on money or the lack of it. Okay, so if you want to solve the bigger picture problems, it is about money. It's about grants. It's less income coming in, more that is required of us to be done, right? So that is where the real problem from an organization sits. We do have quite a lot of regulations. So we've got golden thread that requires us to keep the data in terms of asset throughout the assets life cycle. We've got the new customer regulations standards coming up soon. So there's an awful lot of regulations that we already have, and and data correctly, like you have pointed out, is part of understanding how we can utilize it and how we can make ourselves more efficient. But I'm on the fence around how we do it. So unlike banks, in terms of open banking, our main transactions are not between housing associations. Main transactions are with repairs organizations or with other bodies, not between us. So it is very successful in banking. I was part of the earlier open banking in Europe, which is before the UK one. And they had a good reason why, just financially, because their transactions are between, clearing houses essentially. So that made everything a lot cheaper, and it's a core part of their business. The core part of our business is not between us. It is actually with other parties, with our customers, with our suppliers, essentially. So that's where I would say the need is around a standard, right? So if you've got, like right now, I'm working on with Hacked Standard to create an open API so that the suppliers can connect to us more easily, and we have much more wider pool of suppliers that can easily connect to us, and there's a lot more competition, and we get a better quality service and so on, right? So that's one way. The other way, if you look at in Europe, there's data available as a standard from the government. So if you wanted to house someone, it would tell you whether this person is eligible for this home. Right now, we do all of that manually. So those sorts of things will really transform what we can do. In terms of creating another stick for the regulator to beat us with, is not going to really transform what we need to deliver. We know where we are wrong, and we know where the problems are to a large extent. And I can see my peers across the group. I've spoken to at least the bigger housing association CIOs, and everybody's on the same kind of trajectory. Everybody's on the same kind of thought, and pretty much using very similar technologies. The problem is doing something here means not doing something else. So there's an opportunity cost of doing something. So if we invest in something here, that means we might, even in terms of not just money, in terms of attention, all the kind of stuff, it will be void. So it's not because we are kind of silly or not very clever that we may not have done many of these things. It's because there were other things to be done in its place. So, I mean, I don't want us to be, beat ourselves too much around this. I don't think we are that bad either. We may have been poor before, but right now I think there's a lot of momentum behind a lot of these initiatives and technologies. So that's the bit from me. I mean, the other thing that I'd say is also around how this is going to be run, right? So if it's a consortium like the water company has done, where there's no commercial gain, I mean, that's a very different prospect to a commercial company being that. And then the last thing is right now there's things that are actually laid on to us are not prescriptive. right? They are, they are asking us to get an outcome. They are not prescriptive about how you do it. Being prescriptive might actually also mean that we'll have to spend more money on it, not from your side, from a central side, but from a housing association side, on top of everything else that we have to do, where there is a shortage of money. So hopefully that is giving a little bit of view.
No, thank you, Rajiv. I mean, a point you make there is about being. Do we need to get prescriptive? This is the problem. If we look at some of the new regulations that are coming through at the moment, all the indications are that it's because we as a sector have a problem, and the regulator, the government, is saying to overcome this problem, we are going to get prescriptive. You are going to deal with complaints in a prescriptive way now, and you're all going to do it together. And the beauty of, I'm not suggesting that's what the government needs to do or the regulator needs to do. I think you're absolutely right, Rajiv, that we should have the ability to be able to do these ourselves. I look at the larger organizations, they all seem to be doing something very different. I look at the smaller organizations, and just as you say, the money and particularly the resources aren't there to do it. They don't have the skills. Those skills they do recruit often don't hang around very long. So to have some form of central area that maybe they can draw skills from, and we can share skills, share costs, things that seems to make enormous sense. But yeah, let's consider that. A couple other questions that are our hands raised. Matthew, could I ask you?
Thank you very much. I'm Matthew Grundy from Hacked, and I just wanted to make 3 comments basically. One is relating to the regulators. So we host a regular meeting for NEDs, and we invite people to come and speak to those NEDs to inform them about what's going on across the sector. We had a representative from the regulator at our last meeting on Monday, and data came up in that conversation because we were talking about risk. We were talking about the issues, the current risk register that the regulator has just published, which, believe me, looks pretty awful. If you haven't seen it before, have a look at it in terms of the, I can see Rajiv smiling because I'm sure he's very aware of it. There's more debt, there's more interest rate, there's more demands on the money that isn't there as well, and residents have got less money as well to pay for rents. A comment was made about NROSH at that meeting. For those of you who don't know what NROSH was, that was the National Register of Social Housing, which used to exist in the noughties. It was then not funded anymore, so it went to one side. And the comment was, wouldn't that sort of thing be useful for the regulator? And the regulator basically said, no, we've got enough information already, thanks very much, we don't need any more. I then raised a question which was quite a challenge to the regulator in that format, which was essentially saying that in the conversations we have with a lot of organisations who are looking to implement the data standards, one of the issues they have is the quality of their data. And their fear is that if they implemented data standards, that the quality of their data would then change, and that instead of reporting, say, a 99% compliance with their gas safety, that would reduce down to 85% because their quality of their data is now improved, and therefore that would make them liable to the regulator investigating every other metric that they supplied. So there's no driver for them to improve the quality of their data. Thankfully, I did happen to suggest an amnesty, but that was pushed back by the regulator in no uncertain terms. But they did say that actually what they're looking at is knowledge. If an organisation came to them and said, we've now got better knowledge of our data, actually what we're seeing is that some of our metrics have decreased, they would take that into consideration. So that's a really useful thing to know, that the regulator does want to see data quality improved. But the third thing it takes into is actually the UK housing data standards themselves. Now, we started developing those back in 2018. They've been developed with the sector to look at all the different works and ways that the sector operates. And it's great that you, Rajiv, that you are implementing some of them as well. But we do come up against a lot of barriers for organisations to implement them. What's the benefit to us as an organisation? And it touches back on the point that Mark made earlier, that essentially you've got lots of individual ships sailing across the sea, and they don't necessarily see the benefit of all sailing in the same direction. I don't know if finance is the one that's going to get them on the road. I think risk. I think the risk of them not knowing that all those gas safety checks have actually taken place and that they might suddenly find themselves with another explosion in a flat happening where more people are killed as a result, that might be a driver to data quality. But the challenge we've got at the moment is that there is very little time, there's very little headspace for execs to be thinking about data, and there's very little demand for it to come up to the top of the priority list as well. And I'm sorry if I'm a bit of a voice of doom on that as well.
No, these are the challenges that we need to overcome, Matthew. The more you recognise the challenges, the more you can then look at the ways to try and address them. And I tend to agree that everything's being driven by fear. The what the regulator is introducing at the moment is driven by problems that have arisen, Grenfell, the problems in Rochdale, and so we seem to be reactive in the way in which we introduce change rather than proactive, which is a shame. Cher, good to see you. Could I ask you to ask you a question or make your point?
Yeah, I think based on what you just said, Matthew, I actually think data is very high up the agenda, and I think a lot of people are very interested in data at exec and board level, and even if they don't exactly understand the mechanics that are required to get where they need to get it to, they know they very much want it to be there. So I think it is very, very high profile. I think this alignment feels to me like a no-brainer. Why would you not? And there are so many benefits from doing it and standardizing it. I don't think that's a particularly controversial conversation. I think my major thing, which is just a completely practical issue, and it kind of touches on one of the points that you made, Rajiv, I think, is we're very insularly right now trying to fix ourselves, and we have a million things in flight and a million people doing different things and trying to fix it and looking at what we're doing. And while I 100% see the benefit of this, what I'm trying to work out in my head listening to everybody chat and reading all the comments is, when do I think we would be in a stable enough position to pivot some of our effort into this with some confidence? I feel we would need to be slightly more stable state. I mean, I think a lot of the effort we're doing right now is not hugely unaligned. We're using HACT as the basis of our data structures and such, but I know if I went and had a conversation now and said I've been on this group and this is absolutely sensible, this is what we should be doing, everybody who's currently actively working in data right now would be like, what, as well as what we're doing right now, or instead of what we're doing right now, or how does it touch, and how do I actually create the capacity to really understand what this means? And I get it, and I am completely on board. I suppose I'm just thinking about how and when.
It's I mean, again, another question we need to answer. Interestingly, I was with a colleague of mine, was the chap who's actually my best man, having a drink last night, and he works for central government, and data and data security is his big thing, and he introduced me to the new way of thinking that they have, which was is it called Query Foundation or whatever? Anyway, effectively, it's not about organizations providing data and forming a new database. It's about actually being able to have the permission to go in and just collect data to respond to queries. Now, obviously, you need to, I'm no expert at this, but it is all about thinking through how do we do this without it being a significant additional overhead to those that are already working extremely hard. But I come back to it. Of those 1,600 housing association, there's a huge number of them that don't have the resources to be doing these kind of things, and yet they still have exactly the same compliancy requirements. They all have to achieve the same governance requirements. So these problems are very different for the smaller organisations to the larger ones. But no, thank you, Cher. James, could I ask you your question? Point.
Yes, absolutely. So I guess from my perspective, I mean, I'm not an expert in data, so the detail of all of that I can't really comment on. But I think as an idea, I love it. I think it's really, really exciting. And the reason why I think that, it kind of builds on what Cher was just saying, actually, in that my view is our operating environment. I mean, I've worked in the sector for a long time now, and my view is our operating environment over the last 15 years as I've worked in the sector has only got more challenging. There's only been more stuff with less money, with greater expectation. And I think we as a sector need to kind of accept there will never be a steady state. We are in a different operating environment where it is constant change, and we're going to be dealing with all these different issues. And my reflection on the culture of the sector, and I don't say this as a criticism, I love the sector, is we are, and this echoes what you were saying, Cher, we are a very insular sector. We experience a problem, we get the people in our business to kind of try and work out within our organization, then a new problem comes along and we kind of do the same again. And for me, what is incredibly exciting about the potential of open data is there are hundreds of entrepreneurs and organizations and individuals out there who are desperate to solve our problems and build their businesses and build their things. And actually what open data can allow us to do is really open up our sector. And I think with that comes brilliant things that I think are going to be inevitable. So we just have to accept them. There's going to have to be greater transparency in the sector anyway. So we can proactively choose to do that through this sort of way, or we can wait for the regulator or someone else to come along and force us to do that. So I think but with that transparency comes huge opportunities for others to come in and start to help solve our problems. And my other reflection on the idea is just that from a resident perspective, I've done a lot of work around kind of resident engagement and involvement. I think there is just there's something really powerful about the level of transparency with our residents, which is an obvious point that you've made. But we know that trust is there's a massive breakdown of trust, huge amount of skepticism, and I think that relationship, that dynamic, can really, really shift. So I guess my question is, and I think this might go to Martin or it might go to you, I'm not sure, is I'm really interested with the water companies. How did you get 14 out of 16 organizations to want to get involved? What was the self-interest that got them to say, actually, we're just going to do something completely different? And I guess to Colin and Kay and everybody involved in this, what's your thinking about what will get people to want to do this? What's the driver that's going to get that kind of collaboration happening?
Martin, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so hugely resonates what you said there, James. I think part of the picture here is feeding that ecosystem of innovators with data. So we get a lot of people who want to consume our data to be able to extend our capabilities and provide products and services into the industry, whether it's leakage or water quality or whatever it might be. Part of the I guess as an industry, we have to be quite transparent anyway with our data. So it's not easily consumable in a lot of cases to an end consumer, a customer of ours, though that is changing now with this drive to be more transparent. But we publish a lot of regulatory data into regulatory bodies anyway. So there's a sense here that if we can make that common across different organizations, there's additional value we can realize from something we're already doing, quite frankly. So there's a little bit of that. The other final bit I would add is how the regulatory body manages the industry, in that we are monopolies, but there is competition simulated through performance incentives and penalties based upon performance. And each organization within that are more interested in using data and insight at the exec level to inform how do we perform better against those aspects. So what that means is that actually there is a very much a top-down drive for this information. And if anybody clicks on the link I've put in there around our open data strategy, you can see the forewords written by Heidi, our chief executive. So it's bought in from the very high level, this idea that we want to use data and insight to drive more value for our customers.
Thank you, Martin. I mean, the only thing I'd add, I don't know if any of my colleagues want to make a point, but we talk as a sector that we want to put the customer at the heart of everything we do. Self-interest should not get in the way of that. And I do appreciate time, resources, and distractions, etc. But what you said, James, I think was absolutely marvellous. That we're not here today to I promise you, promote anything other than what we think is going to be in the best interest of the customer, and indeed to social housing organisations, because working together, as Martin has already demonstrated, using open data, citizen science as they call it, allowing others to use that data to help us, is something I think we should all be very passionate about. So no, thank you for raising the point. Paul, can I ask you for your point, please?
I think it's been really interesting seeing all of the comments. But one of the things really that's sort of making me think, there's been a number of comments around the difference between trying to impact our individual operational processes and service delivery by having common system. And I think that would be brilliant, but I think that's probably going to be the toughest nut to crack, especially the cost time of being able to transition across that. But where I sort of see success, certainly for ourselves, being selfish, is being able to gain access to data at scale to really help us understand, get insight, not only from the data set that we're contributing, but then being able to then utilize the new technologies, the AI, because ourselves alone, we're too small to gain any real benefit from it. And that's where we need the scale. So being able to access, download, whatever it might be, to utilize in our own modeling to say, how are we comparing to others in the sector? But equally, just that national scale, I think, will be fantastic. And that, for me, I think that I'm already envisaging the conversations I can have here will be easier to that level by trying to sort of suggest we need to try and move operational systems, because that's the bit at this moment in time I just can't even think how we would get started.
No, thank you, Paul.
That's really good.
No, that's excellent. You made a point just now about AI, and we're probably all aware now, generative AI, whether it frightens you or whether you embrace it, it needs data. Generative AI needs data in order to be able to make decisions and support us. And one of the benefits of open data is that it's something that AI engines can start to use. So thank you, Paul. Eleanor, sorry, you did have your hand up. Do you still want to make your point?
Thank you. I mean, I think I was just worried about distracting the conversation, but it was just an endorsement from someone who's a little bit outside the sector of that point that was just made about the last intervention about transparency and that. So in addition to the really intensive work you're wanting to do on your own transformational systems, for someone who's working outside the sector, just one understanding in a geography who is there is really helpful. So I'm working across London government with the Mayor of London and London boroughs on trying to see how we might scale retrofit, and we're working with the G15 on that. But some real basics about who owns what in a geography is actually quite hard to get in a transparent and an accessible way. And of course, whilst we're talking about some really complex matters, we mustn't lose sight of is what we're talking about is buildings on a street, cheek by jowl, next to each other, sometimes which share a common development history, but owned by multiple parties. So that ability to have some really quite basic data about who owns what, its age, there are some real benefits we can drive out. And the comment that I put earlier as well is, partners do want to work with you, and actually we think we might have some data that we can share on some of the challenges that are in the calling note. So when we think about energy efficiency and the co-benefits in terms of fuel poverty and quality of life, London through its scale has access to data on actual sort of energy use within homes. It's not something, I could speak for and, commit to share, but we have some data which can help us move as a collective housing sector way beyond the sort of the current limitations we have on things like energy performance certificates. So, you know, let's start small. Let's not assume you have to boil an ocean. Some quite small transparency will help, and let's see what we go there. And remember, there are partners who are trying to understand you, and this shared transparency will really help identify who to talk to about what.
Beautifully put, Eleanor. Beautifully put. One of the pillars of open data is collaboration, and not just collaboration within your own sector, but with other sectors. And I think what you've said, Eleanor, just sums that up. There are so many other sectors we could work with to the benefit, come back to it, to the benefit of the customer, because we'd be able to deliver better services to them together. And at a time when we're really struggling for resources as well, you know, there's a chance that by working together we can draw resources and skills from different areas, even across sectors, in order to solve certain problems. Okay, so I don't think I have any more hands raised at this stage. Can I ask, is there anything more, any points my colleagues would like to make? Is there anything more that anyone would like to discuss?
No, it's been a fabulous conversation and really heartening to hear how positive it was. I sort of expected more challenges, but really this is a really great collaborative group. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, Steve. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of challenges, and we are going to need to overcome them. I often believe that if you want people to contribute, then you've got to ask the so what question. Why? Why would I contribute? What's in it for me? Unfortunately, the me is usually the driver for a lot of decisions in life. So it's something we need to consider. Now, we were never that we set 2 hours to run this for potentially, but we always said that if it finished earlier, then so be it. We'd let it stop naturally, and indeed the stuff that we've picked up today is hugely valuable to us.
Emma has got a question.
Sorry, Emma, I missed that.
That's
Please
all
go
right.
ahead.
Hello, I've just been listening intently. Really interesting, and I just wanted to obviously we work with Martin and others on the Stream project, but a lot of the topics that you've discussed today, and you know, sort of the examples that have been given about sector change in other domains, the ODI has worked on over the years, including open banking and the Open Active project, which is in the sport and physical activity sector. We'd be really happy to host a follow-up discussion. I don't want to bore everyone on the call with all the kind of endless examples and learnings and research and reports and tools that the ODI has produced, but we do have an awful lot to offer, and a lot of it is actually available for free. Obviously our consultancy ultimately is, you know, one of our paid for services, but a lot of our tools are openly available, and we'd be really happy. In fact, we'd be welcome an opportunity to share a lot of the things that we've learned over the years and the examples, you know, the case studies and the things that we're continuing to work on, and you know, as the years go on. So if you wanted to have a follow-up meeting with us, then we'd be really happy to do that, and to just point you in the direction of some of those materials and examples and research pieces.
No, thank you, Emma. Almost certainly. The point you're making is a great one. We don't want to recreate the wheel here. We want to draw on the experiences of others. The ODI, I think, has been around for 10 years now. This is not a new initiative.
11.
11. Sorry,
11. I've gone grey in that time. Very well, Colin, as you can see.
You're not the only one. But no, Emma, thank you for the point. Much appreciated. So what I'll probably do, if no one else has any points to make, we'll probably call it a day there. Just maybe a final point. You know, if we want to survive as a sector, like all modern sectors, we need to start using our data better. We've got the Better Social Housing Review, which has recommended that coming together to create and maintain a national audit of all social housing would be a great thing to do, and I think that's a great place for us to start as a sector. And for me, and the point, and various people have made this. You know, James certainly made it. It feels like almost every significant change that we start to accept as a sector is being imposed on us from outside. It doesn't feel like this is a sector that's in charge of its own future. So we have a choice. We can ask the government to engage with us, and we can act together and seize the moment. You know, and so please can I ask you all to consider, you know, whether you could support us in this endeavour, because it truly could make an enormous difference to our customers. So we'll be sending out a very brief questionnaire after this next week. You'll keep it brief, I promise you, but we'd be grateful if you could return it. And so, not to interrupt your day any further, I'd like to just finally thank you all for coming today, for the tremendous suggestions and comments that we've had, and it's hugely appreciated. And please watch this space. We'll keep you posted as to how we progress.